April 18th, 1938, the first time DC has seen a super strength character. After that, we get Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and eventually the Justice League. And from there's been many theories on who the god of DC is, who's been pulling all the strings from behind. Now, some people believe it's the Overvoid, which is essentially the white page of the comic, and because of that, it would contain every single story. Now, there's many more interpretations on who the Supreme Being might be, and whether this be true or not, I want to talk about the idea of the Rider, taking us all the way back to the Animal Man series where he first appears in issue 5. So let's see if he's as strong as people say he is. We first get a seeing of the Rider in Animal Man issue 5 when we dive into the character Crafty. Now, Crafty was immune to death. Anytime he would get severely injured, he would just revive from it. Now, the reason behind this is unknown to us until Crafty gives Animal Man an ancient telling. Now, the gospel goes at the beginning of reality, Earth was messed up. There was no life that wasn't fighting, it was an endless battle of chaos. So Crafty decided to take it up in his own hands and go all the way up to the presence of God. Here is when we see the Rider, his paintbrush, and the canvas where he writes the stories on. The Rider is described as God and makes a deal with Crafty. He will make the world a good place, but only if Crafty takes the suffering of the world, which he accepts. So every time Crafty dies, he's just gonna revive again because he has to take the world's suffering until the end of the comic, where he's eventually killed by the magic bullet and we see the Rider writing out his death. Now, when you get into the idea of the Rider in DC, you then have to get into the idea of metafiction, a concept that allows the Rider to put himself inside the story, which isn't entirely what the Rider from DC is, but it is a good baseline and you will see why. And it all begins in Animal Man issue 25. Now, to understand the Rider, we first have to understand the realm he resides in, that plane being Limbo. Here's the map of DC. As we see, Limbo exists beyond the infinite multiverse and even the sphere of gods, which holds true form Darkseid. Limbo is essentially the place where any forgotten character goes. So if a character's cells were to just fall off, then that character would go to Limbo. In Limbo, we see the infinite monkey theorem, a theory which proposes the idea that if a monkey were to have a typewriter and live eternally, he would just create every single story in existence. And that's exactly what happened. The monkey typed for so long, he made an infinite page book that contained every single story that's ever told. So yes, this book would be infinite because it would have stories of the infinite multiverse and many other stuff. So now when Animal Man gets to Limbo, he travels through it and eventually gets to the house where the Rider resides in. Now, this is actually when it gets interesting for the Rider because we see it's an actual person. What I mean by this is the Rider represents the IRL Rider Grant Morrison, the same person who wrote Final Crisis, one of the biggest crisis events in all of DC. And like I said before, this is when we get into metafiction. So the Rider Animal Man is interacting with is just a metafictional representation of his real self, which just means he's projecting something that is real onto the fiction. But this isn't the limit to his power, and this isn't what makes it a strong case for him to be the god of DC. You see, when Animal Man is talking to the Rider tells him this, but he also tells him his true form is in the real world, which no fictional character can ever reach. And because of this, he's capable of doing whatever he wants in the story. If the plot needs some action, he'll give us some action because he can write it out. If he needs to defeat somebody, he can do that because his true form is the Rider, so he can just write it out. And when Animal Man realizes this and attacks his manifestation, the Rider tells him he made him do that and he can make him do anything. He explains to Animal Man how the purpose of these stories and plots is to entertain us, the readers. This same Rider wrote the comic Final Crisis Superman Beyond, and even the Overvoid is defenseless against him because all it is a page to him where he writes stories on. So I think the reason people say the Rider is the god of DC is because no matter how powerful you want to make a character, by nature the Rider will be unbound by it. He's a real individual that can fictionally create something that can overpower it or just erase it. Is he above the presence? Well, you can argue the presence is him. But whether or not you want to count the Rider's true form a part of the DC hierarchy is all up to you. But for me, that's pretty much it for the Rider. There's not much lore to the character, and I am done.